so much, Dr. Courtney Ray, for being with us today, for kicking us off in this brand new week, where we're concentrating and thinking about Black love, relationships, family. And, you know, just by way of introductions, everyone knows Dr. Ray is an ordained minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She's also a trained neuropsychologist. She has her PhD, people. She's a real doctor around here, okay? And you have your own private practice, and you are also the, tell me a bit about the society that you're part of, the neuropsychology.
So the Society for Black Neuropsychology, it's a professional organization of other people who are neuropsychologists like I am, and who want to help other people, particularly in the Black community, to know about neuropsychology, how it can be helpful to them, and also to help increase the number of Black neuropsychologists too, because there's a lot of Black people who don't even know what neuropsychology is, how we can help them out, and also that this is something that they can do as a profession. So yeah. Love
it. So yeah, let's start there then. What is neuropsychology? What is it?
So neuropsychology is, so one of the things that I tell people is just like how you have physicians and there are different types of physicians. You can go to a general practitioner who just knows all about different things of the body, but they're generalists. And then you can go to people who are specialists. So you can go to an eye doctor or a cardiologist or someone who specializes in feet. You know, you can go to a podiatrist. But I think you guys call it a chiropodist over there.
Yeah, that's correct. We do.
We say podiatrist. And in psychology, it's very much the same way. So every person who is a clinical psychologist goes through the same thing. We all learn basic training and general information about clinical psychology. So all of us are trained in how to do counseling and different things like that. But there are different specialties, and neuropsychologists specialize in the way that the biology of the brain actually influences the brain and behavior. And so that's, in a nutshell, why we are a little bit different. And we will do tests. So if somebody, let's say, has a traumatic brain injury, or just like in football, American football, how a lot of people have had these different concussions and things like that. So we do tests to make sure that if they're able to go back to playing, or how much damage has been done. We test people who have ADHD and autism and Alzheimer's and, you know, any type of organic brain disease. Will sometimes you'll have a neuropsychologist who will assess if somebody has had a stroke, whether or not they can still function well. If you need brain surgery, you definitely need to see a neuropsychologist. And many times people don't know, if it's not an emergency brain surgery, lots of brain surgeries are open surgeries where you are actually awake. And so the neuropsychologist will be in the operating room giving you tests as you are going through the surgery, to make sure that the surgeon isn't hitting the wrong kinds of things. And that's a pretty important thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so we do a whole bunch of stuff, and I do testing with kids and testing with adults and everybody in between. So.
Wow. So what I guess what started you on this journey? When did your interest with the brain, with the human brain, where did it come from?
So I have always had an interest. you got a visitor there? I don't know how much American politics you.
Yeah, we saw.
The fly came over there, huh? Man, Princess Fly.
Yeah.
But let's see. You asked, how did I get into neuropsych?
Yeah, what interests you so much about the brain? Yeah.
So I personally originally went into psychology because, as you said in your introduction, I'm a pastor, and I was doing that for a very long time. Yeah, so I'm a pastor, and one of the things that I really wanted to do was to help us, because in the Adventist church, I'm not sure if everybody who's watching this is familiar with Adventism, but we are very big on the health message, and mental health is a part of the health message. But so many people think only about physical health, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to bring mental health to a place where we could help our people in our congregation as also people outside of the congregation, and including pastors and members, because pastors need mental health help as well.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to get my people into doing mental health, like telling them about it. But a lot of people are like, no, I'll just come to my pastor for everything. And sometimes there were things that were way above my own expertise. So I wound up saying, well, if they're not going to go to somebody who already knows about what they're going through, then I'm going to have to become that person, right? Yes. So I went to, I got my doctorate. I went to Loma Linda University, and I did my PhD in psychology. And while I was there, that's when I was introduced to neuropsychology. I hadn't even known that it was a thing before I started actually going to school. And I have always loved biology. And so I was like, well, this is a really big, component of what I want to do and how I want to help people. And so I decided, why not specialize inside of my clinical psychology degree? So that's how that started.
Wow, that's how that journey started.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I know people are kind of tuned in. They want that because they like the title. They're hoping for some juicy gossip. They're hoping for the tea. That's right. They want to see all the tea spilled, right? They want to know what's going on. What impact has neurology and psychology and I guess our mind, what role is it playing in maybe their own ability to find relationships, or maybe what light can it shine on individuals maybe that they've been in a relationship with, like, because they always thought that their ex was crazy. They're waiting for you to prove it. Okay.
And this is confirmation, right? That's funny. Well, here's the thing. People think about psychology as, oh, you're a crazy person. There's something wrong with you, right?
Yes.
But just like you don't just go to a physician when you're on your deathbed. Hopefully you're not just doing that. Hopefully you guys have great health care there in the UK. So you guys probably going to the doctor all the time for just checkups, just on a Tuesday, just going, huh? we don't have that. But it's important to check out how you're doing. And it's the same thing with mental health as well. You don't have to be crazy to go to a psychologist. You don't have to have something wrong with you. But many people, if they were honest with themselves, there are some things that they recognize are things that they could probably use help in. I told you this is New York City back here, right? And there's 8 million people there. Yes. And 2/3 of people have had depression or anxiety at one point or another. And people think that it's so rare to feel depression or so rare to feel anxiety. But so many of us have something that's going on that we don't even recognize in ourselves. And if we had an insight into our own personal mental health, that helps us to be able to have strong relationships with others, because we only know how to be how we are, right?
Wow.
So we are recycling those habits that we've learned, those communication skills that we've seen our parents model for us. Sometimes those aren't so good. Sometimes they aren't really healthy. And so we perpetuate these, what we call maladaptive patterns. And so we're just doing these bad habits and perpetuating them to our relationships with other people and to our own children. We're passing those same behaviors down. And so when we finally come to terms with the fact that we might have some things that we could work on, we're not perfect, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we kind of learn some more things, some more tools, some more communication skills, and how to be more adaptive in our coping when things go wrong, then we're able to have healthier relationships, and we're able to pass down good skills to our kids so that they can learn how to communicate better with other people too.
This is this is so difficult, Doctor. This is because this is really the heart of the matter. Like, if we can just improve our relationships, even just by 1%, all the different relationships in our life, it would just make such a huge difference.
Absolutely.
But I feel like there's just this obstacle, this hurdle that we have to come over when it comes to even approaching someone with this type of help. What are some of the hurdles that you have seen, especially as a community, that we have towards kind of going to a practitioner,
Right.
that you've seen prevalent in kind of the lives of our community?
So in the faith community, I see many people who are very averse to getting help because in their minds, you know, all I got to do is pray a little bit more. All I got to do is go to church a little bit more. All I have to do is go into Bible study more. And if I was just a more faithful Christian, then I wouldn't have these problems, right? You know, which is so silly, because if you had a heart problem or if you had a broken bone, you wouldn't just be like, oh, I'm just going to pray it away. You would go to somebody who could help you. But that idea that all I just need is a little bit more Jesus and I'll sing a song and everything will be fine, is something that we have told ourselves about our brains. And our brain is an organ just like every other organ in our body. And we need to care for it and know how to help when someone else to help if we don't know how to do it, so that we will be able to help someone help us, because we can't have somebody else fix us. So it's not like a surgery where they could just go in there and fix whatever's wrong. But we need to help someone else so that they can help us, and that professional can help us get through whatever it is that we're going through. The second part of it is in the Black community specifically, we have this idea of this distrust of any doctors, and there's lots of things. I mean, I don't know all of what may have transcribed in, you know, the UK, but here in the US, there's been a lot of situations where Black people have been used in medical experiments and just in the past. And this is not like centuries ago.
No.
This is, you know, recent past, where people have done things that have intentionally harmed the Black community in the name of science. And, you know, I don't know how familiar you guys are with some of these things, but I mean, modern gynecology was born on the fact that people, or the father of modern gynecology, would buy slaves and would perform surgeries on women, Black women. And even the understanding of syphilis and some other vaccines to fight some venereal diseases, we found out through testing of Black soldiers. Like, they gave men these different diseases who were in the army. The Tuskegee experiments were experimenting on Black people and trying to test out whether or not those diseases could be cured by the different methods. And so Black people, especially older generations, have a real fear of any kind of medical anything. And when you're talking about you want to talk about my brain, like people think of brainwashing and hypnotism and all kinds of other things. So there is a misconception about what psychology is. And then lastly, the whole idea of people having this stigma against mental health. And, you know, it's the idea of, I'm not crazy, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need anyone to, you know, tell me something's wrong with me because I'm perfectly fine. And if I admit that there's something wrong, then that's a weakness that I may have. And I think that men are probably more prone to that than women, but women as well. And a lot of times we see kind of this myth of like the strong Black woman. And listen, we are strong, but I mean, everyone needs help. And this is kind of when I go back to the whole idea of even the biblical model of health is a holistic one. So when we look in the Bible, we see that Esther, when she was, in a place where she didn't know what to do, she called her friends and was like, hey, you guys, I want you guys to pray with me and fast with me. Like, she didn't do it by herself. And
No.
even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus goes to his disciples and he says, I need you guys. I need you to come and to pray with. Now, they were kind of whack. They fell asleep on him. but the whole idea that God incarnate, our Savior, said, I need someone else to be with me, to help support me. And I am not afraid or ashamed of asking for support. Like, if God could be like, I want support, how much are we gonna be like, oh, I'm too strong for that, I don't need anybody's help? Like, what kind of nonsense is that? We all need help sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. I love it. Okay, so like I like where you're linking it to kind of physical health, and like, a physician might say important things to do. You should be exercising every day, you should be stretching every day. These things are important to keep your body agile. Prevention is better than cure. So with that kind of in mind, in thinking of our mental health, what are some of the ways that we can just tune it up every day, or what are the little things we can do every day to help maintain a good balance in our mental health?
Well, one of the things that I always tell people is to take time for yourselves. And that's so hard. Even in the time of COVID, like, I think that people were really jarred by the whole idea of isolation and not going back to work, because we're so used to being busy.
Yes.
We're so used to going somewhere and having our time crowded. And when it was like, okay, we have to stop for a little while, that was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And so many people were freaked out by that, So we're so used to having just our time filled with other people and other things and just being busy, that we very rarely have time where we just kind of center ourselves and focus ourselves. That's one of the great things about being people of faith, that you do spend some time in meditation with God, or you should. But that time of centering yourself, where you aren't just running into the day and don't have a break for yourself. And then also not just spending time outside of, being on Facebook and working and tending to the kids and doing all that, but really doing things that are helpful, that bring you joy and bring you happiness. Because many times we just don't even, like, you wouldn't say, oh, I don't need to brush my teeth, or I don't need to, wash my body or anything like that. Obviously, you do things to take care of yourself, and good hygiene of your mind is taking care of yourself too. Like, figuring out, okay, what is it that can help me feel better? What is it that makes me joyful? And knowing yourself well enough to understand what those things are, and taking time also to be grateful for things, being able to see what things are good things that have happened in your life, dwelling on positivity. Those are just very basic things. So this is not treatment for people who already have maybe depression or anxiety, but these are things that can kind of help us when we are sort of in a baseline mode. And if you know how you are in a baseline mode, then when something is wrong, you can say, well, this is a little bit different than how I usually behave, and I can tell that something is off. Knowing some of the signs of depression and anxiety are really important. So when people are depressed, a lot of times they don't do the things that they enjoy anymore. They isolate themselves from the people that they love. It's harder to get up in the morning. Or sometimes they are very driven and focused into one thing, and they're not necessarily expanding themselves beyond that hyper focused thing. And the body and the mind are very connected. So doing things like you are exercising, I know that sounds crazy, but we have found that exercise actually helps increase your endorphins, which is like heroin and morphine are all what we call opioids, and they are external opioids, but endorphins are the opioids that your body naturally is able to produce. And so when you exercise, you are actually really giving yourself your own high. And it helps you feel better, you know, and getting rest. I know that that sounds crazy, that even makes a difference, but you know, people who don't sleep, they hallucinate, they're more depressed, they're more anxious, they're less cognitively focused, all those kinds of things. And so it's like
tricky one.
These
Sleep.
things,
You're telling me to sleep again.
I know,
Oh,
and it
gosh.
sounds so basic, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know that, you know, and that's kind of the hardest thing. Like when we tell people about how to prevent the spread of coronavirus, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay away from crowds. People are like, that's it? That sounds too easy. I'm not doing that, you know, and they just do whatever they want to do. And so when I'm talking about, when I tell people about, you know, these are some of the ways to stave off depression and anxiety, people are like, oh, that's it? That doesn't sound very scientific, like, you know, and so they don't care. Like they kind of wave it off because it's too easy. I'm like, everybody is internally like Naaman, you know, all you got to do is go and dip into the river 7 times. That's too easy.
Yeah. No, love it. It's really, really powerful stuff. And, you know, when we then, do you think our mental state, so our mental health, do you think that the problems are, if there are issues, do you think they are more they can be exacerbated within relationships? Like can relationships do something that can trigger some things that maybe are dormant for a while, and why is that, or how is that?
So absolutely. So they can exacerbate problems that have already been there, and they can also help to ameliorate different things as well. So if you have a positive relationship where you and the other person are helping each other, are being, you know, supportive of one another, we know that having good community support is one of the things that helps you to, 1, prevent mental illness, and 2, if you have a mental illness, to deal with it more effectively. But at the same time, having a negative community, having a negative environment, having negative people around you can also decrease your mental health as well. And so when you don't have a strong support system, you find that people's mental health goes down. And even diseases that are very biologically based, like schizophrenia.
Right.
We know that there's a genetic component to schizophrenia, but one of the things that we need, there's this theory called the stress theory. So that is saying that if you have a genetic predisposition to this disease, you won't necessarily have it manifest in yourself unless you are in a stressful situation, and that triggers that disease to kind of, you know, become full blown. So people who have a tendency for schizophrenia, and we have seen this in like twin studies and sibling studies. So if one person, they might have a genetic predisposition to it, but they have lived their childhood and their adolescence and their young adulthood in a positive environment where parents have been supportive of them, where they haven't been exposed to trauma or anything like that. And even though they have schizophrenia or this gene for schizophrenia, they will not manifest schizophrenia. But people who have a traumatic incident or abusive situations or a harsh environment, that in and of itself will trigger for that that disease to actually become manifest in them. And so we see this in I mean, that's an extreme example, but it definitely is the same for other things as well. So if you are in a very stressful relationship and toxic relationship, obviously you're going to be more prone to anxiety and depression, especially if you're already have a tendency towards that, or if you have a genetic predisposition towards that, or if you've had depression or anxiety in the past, that relationship can bring that about again. And so if you have people who are supportive of you, then you can be you know, you can kind of insulate yourself from some
Yeah.
of these things in
Yeah.
some ways. And so that's why, even though we talk about relationships, like romantic relationships as being really important, to be honest, the most important relationship that you have for your mental health is the parent-child relationship, because the way that your parents treat you has much more to do with your adult mental health than any
Wow.
other relationship that you will ever have.
Really?
So yeah, so it's fascinating to see these like longitudinal studies of children going all the
Okay,
way
you've got
through
to explain that
adulthood.
word. What longitudinal? What is...
I said longitudinal study. So when we study someone and we follow them for years, for several years at a time. So
Okay.
instead of like a study of a whole bunch of different people, we
Mm-hmm.
study a set number of people for a
Okay.
long period of time. And so when we follow people throughout their lives, what you see is that people who grow up to be anxious people or withdrawn people or angry people or people who have these personality disorders most often are people who have had those patterns that have been somehow set off during their childhood with their relationships with their parents. And it affects the way that you treat your relationship, your marriage relationship, your dating relationships, all of that are directly linked to the way that your relationships with your parents were. And we see this over and over and over again. And there might be some outliers of people,
of course,
but you know, because there are some people who maybe their parents weren't great people, but maybe they had a pastor or a coach or a teacher or someone else who has been able to be that person and sort of help them to establish resilience in the midst of whatever kind of conflict that they may have had. But if you have unhealthy relationship in your childhood with your parents, that is the single most significant cause of having dysfunctional relationships as an adult. So
wow.
So parents take care of your kids, man.
That's what from one perspective, those parents who are watching, that's how, you know, absolutely we have to. That's a whole nother level of pressure you put on us. Thanks for that, Doctor.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
But also, what do you think you can you heal some of those relationships? Or actually, let me put it differently. Do you think it is beneficial, let's say, could an adult potentially trace maybe some of the breakdowns in their relationships to maybe needing to resolve some kind of trauma with their parents, and can it be resolved, or is the damage done? What do you think?
Yeah, no, we definitely believe that you can help to heal some of that, because if we didn't, then we wouldn't have a job, right? You know, because the whole idea of psychology is that we can do something. Like, you're not a lost cause. Like, oh, I had a bad relationship with my parents, I'm never gonna have love, you know, all that kind of stuff. Obviously there are things that you can do, but that's where it comes back to the idea of wanting to help someone to help you, because you can't just go to a doctor and just be like, oh, fix me. You know, make me better, make me a better husband, make me a better father. You can't, that's not going to happen. You would need to go and admit, hey, there's something that I need to explore. And, you know, those things we talk about, like, what are your goals for what you want to get out of this? And we try to help you towards those goals. And there's different methodologies of therapy that might be best for whatever situation that's the issue that you're dealing with. And we work towards what is the best for you to try to figure out how can we help you see how these patterns have evolved and how you can break those patterns as well. And so what relationship things have you been practicing and perpetuating throughout your life? Because people do what works for them. Like, even negative relationships and negative behaviors, for some reason, this works for you. This is comfortable in some way, or this is familiar in a way for you, and it is filling something for you. And so you have to say, why is this filling something for me? What is this filling for me? And how can I get that same thing filled in a positive way or in a healthy way? Because if you are doing the same patterns of behavior, that's because you are comfortable with it, and changing is more distressing than staying the same. Like just staying and doing what I'm always doing is way easier.
Even just having this conversation, I'm like, oh God, I'm getting uncomfortable just thinking about it. Like, I'm just like, oh gosh, like, because it's that idea of, hold on, it's comfortable to just say, oh, that's just the way I am. Oh, that's just the way she is. Oh, that's just the way he is. It's kind of comfortable to just say that, but actually to start thinking about, no, you can actually start working on this. That just opens a whole can of worms, right? Wow. So the first step, let's say someone watching this and is like, okay, doctor, I have a pattern of broken relationships and I don't know why. Yeah, so they don't seem to work. Where do you start? I know people pay lots of money for this today, guys. So I hope you're enjoying this right now because you're getting a nice.
That's right. I'm gonna. Anybody who's watching this, don't worry. I'm gonna send the bill to Luke so he can pay. And it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
Definitely not.
But yeah, so the first step, I know that this sounds corny and it sounds cliche, but the first step is admitting that you have a problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a cliche for a reason, and that's because it's really true. Because what we look at with the stages of change, there's this model called the trans-theoretical model of change. The first step is pre-contemplation, and pre-contemplation is you don't even recognize that you have a problem. You don't think that there's anything wrong. Contemplation is saying, okay, actually, you know what? There might be something wrong. Maybe I need to work on that. And then after that, it's like, okay, maybe I need to make a plan to do something about this. Maybe I need to work on this. And then the next stage is actually putting the plan into motion and doing something about it. And then the last stage is like maintaining that plan. And that's the same for anything. So whether you are trying to stop smoking, or you are trying to start exercising, or you're trying to eat more healthfully, you have to first get into your mind that, okay, there is a change that needs to be made. Then you have to say, okay, now what do I need to make that change? And then actually make a plan for that change and actually enact that change. And it sounds like, oh, that's very elementary. But when you break it down like that, it helps people to kind of realize, well, what stage am I at? Because there are some people who might, just like you, they're hearing this and they're like, oh, okay. So before they were in pre-contemplation, they didn't even know there was a problem. Yeah. So now they're listening and they're like, oh, okay, there might be something that I need to do.
Yeah.
And people can stay in that stage for a really, really long time where they're like, that's interesting. I should change, like yeah, I should go to the gym. I should be eating more vegetables, and the whole idea of you're thinking, yeah, I should go to figure out what's wrong with these broken relationships. And you can stay there and just never do anything about it. And you can continually say, oh, why is this happening? Why am I always in these bad relationships? Yeah. But it's like, okay, you recognize that you're in a bad relationship, but you need to go to the next step. You need to move to the next stage and actually make a plan to do something. And so that plan includes going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker. I'm not sure how the equivalents of our professions translate into the UK, but you would go to a mental health therapist the psychotherapist of some sort, who you would be able to talk to and work out some of these things. And you give them a history. That's always the first step. Wow. So you talk to them and they will ask you questions. Like, I start at birth. Like, with
but we're gonna lie to you at first. We're gonna lie to you at first, though, right?
I know, okay, and that's part of it. That is part of it, because at first you need to admit that there's something that's going on. And so I asked, like, did your parents smoke when you were younger? Did they drink? Did they do, did your mom do drugs while she was pregnant with you? Because all of those small things can add up. The people who you related to, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, who has any mental illnesses in your family? Because I need to know whether or not you're predisposed to some of those things, you know? And then
mm,
I ask about your family. Have you ever been abused? Do you get along with your siblings? Do you get along with your
mm.
parents? Tell me the relationships that you had with your teachers when you were in elementary school. Tell me
Wow.
about your relationship with your bosses and your supervisors and all those other kinds of things. And then we talk about all of these different types of relationships so that
Jeez.
we could get into those things. And sometimes people are really hesitant. I remember one time, a gentleman came and, you know, he's telling me all this stuff. And sometimes people will ask if someone else can come with them. It depends on the situation. Most of the time I
Mm-hmm.
say no, but
Mm-hmm.
this particular time, for whatever reason, I let his wife come in,
Mm-hmm.
and she stopped in the middle and she's like, "You're not telling her the truth. If you want, you need to tell the truth about what's going on." And, you know, and she's like,
Yeah.
"Yes, he was abused. I am not going to let him lie,"
Mm-hmm.
you know, and all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And he started
Yeah.
just breaking down and crying, you know,
Wow.
and, you know, he's just like, I feel so ashamed. I don't want to talk about it, all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. And people feel so much shame about what has happened to them in their
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like to tell people is your past is not your fault. You are not
Mm.
responsible for your past. You are responsible for your future. And that
Love
is
that.
100% in your control.
I love
So
that. I love
you
that.
have nothing to be ashamed about of what has been done to you as a child or anything like that.
Mm.
And that whole idea of, you know, not wanting to be truthful can actually impede your progress. You know, it's like
Mm.
going to the doctor. You have some kind of heart problem. Oh, I have chest pains.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, do you smoke? Nope. Do you drink? Nope. Do you exercise? Yep, I exercise 5 times a week." You know, and you're just lying through your teeth about everything. It's like, how are you going to get any help
Yeah.
if this person doesn't know what's really happening? And
Yeah.
then, so you got to commit yourself. If you're going to go through all the time and the expense of booking an appointment, going there, paying the money, because like I said, it ain't cheap.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
You need to get the most out of it. Like,
Yes.
don't lie, because we're there to help you. We're not there to
Yes.
judge you. We're there to help you.
Yeah.
And then one thing that I tell people is that, you know, don't feel discouraged. If it's kind of like a match as well,
Yeah.
because when you are talking to a psychologist, you are trying to figure out whether or not they match you and you guys are able to vibe together. And so
Mm.
maybe that might not happen the first time. Maybe the
Mm.
first couple of times it will take you to kind of see whether or not this is just like if you're going out on a date, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
mean that there's something wrong with the other person. It doesn't mean that
Mm.
there's something wrong with you if you guys
Mm.
don't match. It just means
Mm.
that there might not be a good match. And so just
Yeah.
like you kind of shop around for your barber or for, you know, whatever, you don't say, "Well, I'm never going to another barber again because
Yes.
I didn't like this one." You know,
Yeah.
you
Yes.
just say,
Yes.
"Okay, that person didn't cut my hair the way I wanted to. I'll find somebody else."
Yes.
And it's the same for a psychologist. If you go to somebody and you're like, "Oh, I'm not really feeling this," you know, let them know that. Trust me, I don't get along with every patient that has ever come in. And, you know, sometimes I'm glad
Yeah.
when people are like, you know, and they tell me, because one of two things will happen.
Yeah.
If you're honest about what you might be feeling in the relationship of
Mm.
you and your therapist, they might be able to look and say, "Okay, this is something that we can work out." Because a lot of times the way that you react to your therapist
Mm-hmm.
is a pattern of behavior as well.
Wow.
So you might be very much like, "Oh, I don't want to deal with this person," or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And maybe that's because you have a tendency to sabotage relationships with people who are trying to help you, you know? So if that's the case, you need to work through that with your therapist and try to see, okay, is there something that is beyond just, "I don't feel like going anymore," or "I'm not really vibing with this person." So talking, even that idea of, "I'm not really feeling you, doctor," you know,
Mm.
even that
Mm.
conversation
Mm.
is an important
Mm.
conversation. I remember having a patient
Wow.
who, you know, she got upset with me one time because she was like, because we have usually a 50-minute or 55 minutes, even though it says an hour, 5 minutes are on either side so that you can transition from one person to another.
Yeah.
And I remember that I had one of my patients who was like irritated. She's like, "You're always looking at your clock when it's time to go." And I'm like, "Because it's time to go." It's time to go. And she was really upset about that. And I remember we had to process through it. Like, what is it that makes you unhappy about the fact that I tell you that it's time to go, or we have to wrap up? And sometimes people, and she would be one of these people who would towards the end, because like usually psychologists will give kind of a little signal about, okay, as we're wrapping up, or as we're ending, let's, do this or whatever to try to wind down. Like, she would be one of these people who would try to start a whole new topic right as we're about to leave. And we kind of process like, what is going on here? Because every time we get to the end, you have another thing. And at the end, you get really upset when I'm about to leave. What is that? And when we talked about it, she was feeling abandoned by everyone in her family. She felt abandoned by her father. She felt abandoned by her brother. She always felt like she was different, like other people didn't like her, that she was, always feeling rejected. And and so her feelings towards all these other relationships, she was like projecting them onto our relationship. And so that in and of itself is an important part of your healing, and saying, what is this relationship that we have as the patient and the therapist, and what are some insights that can be drawn from that as well? So being honest with your therapist, not just about what's going on in the past and with other relationships, but being honest about your relationship with them as well, because whether it's good or bad, or whether it's indifferent, or whether you feel in some kind of way, let them know, and that honesty can actually be helpful to you too. That was a long answer.
No, phenomenal answer. No, really good stuff. And I know they're loving it down in the comments. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, this is a free taster session. So jot any questions you've got down below. They'll pop up on Lorena. They'll pop up on your screen. Courtney, they'll pop up on your screen. So just have a look if you see anything flash up. So let's then bring this into kind of the dating arena, right? What are you looking for, either previously or currently or in the future, when you are considering someone? What should we be thinking about? Because I mean, you know that you see it all the time when someone finds out that someone's a psychologist or a therapist, they're like, oh gosh, let me stay on my P's and Q's now, because they're going to be analyzing me before if I say hello or hi or hey. So, but I'm sure, you just wouldn't be able to switch it off because it's your training, right? So, what type of cues, what kind of hints can you kind of give us for picking up on certain cues? Because I know, things like narcissism is something that's kind of in the lexicon at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it, from red table talks to all these different things. Narcissism has kind of been the hot button topic, the
buzzword, right?
Yes, has become the buzzword that people are now almost on the lookout for. But maybe what are some little cues and subtle things that we should be aware of, and not necessarily to say we can't be with that person if they have that, but just to be aware of maybe what we might be getting ourselves into. Are there some cues we could be aware of? Right.
So I think that the narcissism is one, and that idea of, are they always talking about themselves? So if you're on a date with somebody and they're only talking about themselves, they're not asking you any questions about you. They're not caring about what you want, and they're not asking anything about. It's just kind of like, okay, well, this person isn't interested in the actual relationship with anybody but themselves, But then also, whether or not that person is someone who's controlling. So sometimes you'll see people who try to dominate a conversation, or dominate what you do, or dominate even down to what you eat. There are people who will order for you, and some people think that that's, a kind gesture. Maybe that's, if that's part of your culture, that's fine. But you know, you have to be clear whether or not that is something that you think is okay, or something that you want to do, because there can also be a part of that is patronizing. When, you know, even when it's somebody who is supposedly caring about you, if they are doing things that are controlling and doing things that are, their preferences always have to go the way they want them to go, that is an issue as well. Someone who doesn't talk about what's going on in their lives, somebody who is very secretive. Now that like you said, this doesn't necessarily mean that people like this are undateable, but it just means that there might be something that you need to know about. Like, well, if you're always very closed and always very isolated, they might be somebody who struggles with their own self-esteem. They might be somebody who struggles with depression. They might be somebody who struggles with anxiety. And knowing that before you get into a serious position is important, because you have to figure out, what is this something that is important to me to know? Because like we see with Kanye and Kim, you know, Kanye has a diagnosable disorder. He has bipolar disorder. And a lot of people, I think you need to also be honest with yourself to figure out whether or not you are a person who likes to save people, because there are some people who like to be in a relationship with somebody who seems like they have some problems, so that you can be the hero in their life, you can be the savior in their life. And so, you know, you gravitate towards people who have issues that are best helped by a psychologist, but you want to be that person. You know, I can fix them. I can be the one who saves them. And there are people who have a pattern of those types of relationships as well. So be on the lookout for yourself to know, like, who are the types of people that I find myself attracted to, and what are the patterns of behavior that they display. Because you can't, unless you're a psychologist, even I would not date somebody for the purpose of, oh, I can fix them, because you are too close to that person, even if you are a psychologist, to help them. I don't counsel my family. I don't counsel my close friends. I can't do that, because we have too close of a relationship. So you can't fix the people that you're with. That's not what's going to happen. Somebody said, what if there's someone that you're with, but suddenly they change and become controlling, aggressive, and narcissistic? And what I'll say is, very often, most people don't just become that. Most of the times there are small red flags that people will overlook, because they're so enamored with the person. They're so in love with this person. Now, it is true that there are people who hide it very well, but they will do those same behaviors. But again, they will kind of cover them in, oh, this is me being nice to you. This is me looking out for you. This is me helping you. You know, I'm ordering your food for you because I'm helping you out. I'm picking out your clothes because I know what's best for you, and I'm trying to look out for you. And so those things at first might seem really sweet and so nice and so genuine. And then later on it becomes, no, you're going to wear this thing because I'm telling you that that's what you're going to wear. And you're going to do this, and you're going to go out when I tell you to go out, and those kinds of things. So the intensity of those behaviors might increase as you progress in the relationship and they become more comfortable and they believe that they've won your trust. But those behaviors, there's so many times when people, you know, they're in an abusive relationship and they'll say, oh, this came out of nowhere. And then when you're exploring the relationship with them and you're talking to them, they slowly come to realize, oh, wow, that was going on, you know, when we first met. That was happening when we first dated. But they were smaller things. They were much easier to miss. They were much more subtle, and it wasn't as in your face. So it wasn't until it got to sort of this fever pitch where they couldn't ignore it anymore that they finally found themselves like, oh my goodness, I'm in this relationship with this person who's abusive and aggressive and controlling and all these other kinds of things, and I didn't know it. But if you had been paying attention, you would have known it. And like I said, and even as I'm saying these things, I don't want anybody to feel like they are to blame if they are in a relationship like that, because anything that people are doing, their patterns of behavior, they are responsible for those things.
Yeah.
So they're the ones, if they are being abusive or they're being controlling or they're doing those things that are maladaptive, that is on them. That's not on you. And, you know, sometimes it can be so subtle that you don't necessarily notice because they cover it with all these other things. All these other things are nice, and there's this one little thing, and then those things kind of become much more noticeable after time. So if you are in that kind of relationship, don't believe that, oh, it's my fault, I should have known, I should, you know, don't beat up on yourself like that, because, you know, people who are like this, like I said, they have had a lifetime. These behaviors don't just start, they don't just come out of nowhere. They have had a lifetime of cultivating this pattern of behavior and cultivating this way of being that comes off very charming and very kind. And this goes for men and women, because I've seen women who are like that, because most of the time when we think of abuse, we think of physical abuse and we think of men. And we think of that kind of relationship, but there are women who are also controlling and aggressive and narcissistic. And that can be also very difficult for men, especially because they might not want to admit that they are in a relationship where someone is doing that to them, and they feel like, oh, I can't admit this, you know. But the truth is that it's the same thing. It's the same types of behaviors, and it might not manifest as physical violence or anything like that. It might never, male or female, it might never manifest as physical issues, but it can be emotionally gaslighting, being very manipulative. Gaslighting, just for you, because I know that some people don't know what that is. It's like when somebody is doing something and you are kind of checking them on it, and they kind of make you think that you're crazy. Like, no,
I didn't mean that.
Exactly.
What do you mean? Yeah.
Exactly. So
and that's an extremely British thing. I'll tell you that much.
You said
that
what?
I think that's a very British thing to do. Like, oh, I didn't realize what I did was possibly offending you. No, I didn't know. Is a very, trust me, that I think that's very common here in Britain. We may not use the term, but it is definitely prevalent here. Interesting. And it's also possible that, or let me ask you, is it also possible that maybe our receptiveness or acceptance of that type of behavior, again, is because we've kind of seen that modeled as well? So we kind of reach for that type of person,
right?
Because we thought isn't that how the man's meant to be? Isn't that how the woman's meant to be? Like, that's how my mum was. That's how my dad was.
Absolutely. We see that again, where people gravitate to what they've seen. They only know how to be what they've seen. And if you have only had models like that in your life, then you will do those things. You will replicate those behaviors. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody who has grown up in an abusive household or in a household of emotional manipulation is going to themselves be that way. But you have to, most often, if that happens, you have to be very conscious in changing your behavior and say that I'm not going to do that. And you have to, like, first recognize that that's something that isn't great, and then actively try to work against it, because that it is the natural tendency to replicate what you have seen in your own life.
This is powerful stuff. So would you condone, or do you think it's a good idea, like, when, you know, dating, I'll go back to dating again, just because I think, you know, it's quite an important phase. Do you think should we be kind of questioning or asking questions of the person that we're dating, like, so tell me about your
family?
Yeah, like, how can you subtly, do you think it's worth subtly, you know, prodding and what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that especially as you get closer to saying, okay, this is somebody that I want to have a you know, this is less casual relationship and more of a substantive relationship, I definitely think you need to be asking those questions, especially if your mindset is, I want to be married to this person, or potentially, not necessarily that you're walking down the aisle right now, but if it is in your mind that, hey, I might be married to this person, it is kind of important to find out those things. I don't think your first date, you should be like, so tell me about your mom and dad and answer this questionnaire about, you know, let me do this.
Was your mom on drugs? Was your mom on drugs when she was pregnant with you? you. I just need that answered right now.
Exactly. So, I mean, you know, obviously you don't want to do, that's probably not going to be getting you a second date if you do that. Maybe not. But at a point, I think that is an important conversation to have. And it doesn't, and, you know, it can be incremental, obviously. Like, hey, what kind of a relationship do you have with your parents? Like, oh, you know, if somebody doesn't have a relationship with their parents, if you never meet their parents, if they never talk about their brothers or their sisters, or, you know, and it's just like, there's no sign of any kind of connection with their family, that itself is a red flag. Now, it's not to say that it can always, like, there are some people who came from really toxic relationships with their family and they have separated themselves from that, and it was for the better. But I find it rare that there's a person who doesn't have any relationship, unless they were adopted. Most people have some type of relationship with someone. And I don't know if you've heard these podcasts, like Dirty John. Have you seen that, heard that? You know, one of the things that when I was listening, so for those of you who may not know, it's a true story about a lady who met this guy on a dating site, and the guy turned out to be this very controlling and narcissistic guy, and it was crazy. He was a manipulator, all this thing. It's a great series. It's really crazy. You should listen to it. But it's told by these interviews with the woman who's in, I'm not going to spoil the end for you guys, but they're talking to her. And as she's talking and she's saying these things about her relationship with him, I'm just like listing off, like, girl, you didn't think that was weird. You didn't think that was odd. You didn't. And so one of the things that was a really big flag to me was, she never met any of his family. She never, you know, he never talked about them. Like, there was no, like, connection to the people that he grew up with. Like, and it's like, there's something going on there. There's a little something that you need to dig a little deeper. And so that is one thing for me. I gotta meet somebody. You may not be real close to your family, but I need somebody, a cousin, somebody. I need to meet.
I need anybody, please. You know? No, we're being warned because this gives us a 2-minute countdown when it's near the end. So we're just being warned that it doesn't cut off. So it is going to cut off in a minute. So as we're wrapping up, before it cuts off, what I'd love to ask is, do we have, as Black people, do we have a propensity to some mental health disorders than others genetically, or is it done purely on an individual basis? The stressful environment, the reality, what it is to be living while Black, driving while Black, playing while Black, all of these things are realities that we have to face, which cause us to be living in more stressful environments. I mean, that's just so key.
And a lot of people don't, and that is why, you know, even though we as a community are less prone to go to a psychologist or a psychologist because of all the stigma and all the other things that we talked about earlier, that's why we, of all people, are the ones who need it the most, because we keep all of these things bottled up inside, and we try to deal with them on our own, and we try to just kind of, oh, I'm strong enough to get through this. And it's like, but we as people, we need healing. We need collective healing. We need to be able to have someone who says, and just the fact of, I understand what's going on, to be able to have someone to say, you aren't going through this alone, or that you aren't crazy for feeling this way. All of those things, that affirmation can help you in your own mental health and mental journey and healing. Because if you feel like you are the only person who's going through this, then you can have not just the psychological stress of it, but that can make you feel angry too. Like, why am I the one who has all of this, and I'm bearing this by myself and all that other kind of stuff. And it impacts the way that you treat other people as well. Because if you are continually under this cycle of pressure all the time, it's going to come out in one way or the other. And it might not come out on your job because your boss ain't going to have it, but it might come out in the way that you talk to your spouse, or the way that you talk to your kids, or other types of relationships.
This is fascinating stuff. Like, and I'm just, it's not fair that, you know, members are gonna get to have you as a pastor, and you've got all of this knowledge. Like, this is something that you know, because as a pastor, this is just such a blessing to be able to have that, in addition, that understanding and awareness of neuropsychology. Because, as you say, not only can you identify with people, but you can also offer some really helpful practical tips as well. And I think that is so important. And I think that's why it's important that we do have more Black people in all kind of facets and occupations in life, because there are just things that other races, or not even other nationalities, other ethnicities, they're just not going to know, not for any fault of their own. It's just not their experience, right?
Exactly.
So
and it even impacts the way, and this, going back to the very beginning, kind of making a circle of, like, you know, the Society for Black Neuropsychology, one of our main goals, I told you, is to increase the number of people who are Black who are in this profession. And for exactly the same reason that you were just saying, like, you know, it's not necessarily that other people who are in other professions can't relate, but there are some things that maybe might get past you if you are not of that same culture, to recognize or be attuned to something that someone else who's sitting in front of you might be going through. And maybe that's the reason why they might be stressed out. It's interesting that when everything was going on with, you know, the protests that were going on this summer, and after George Floyd's murder, there were a lot of people who reached out to me to say that, you know, see if I was okay. But they were mostly other people who were other minorities who recognized that, hey, there might be something that is traumatizing. But if that isn't your experience, that's not something that you have lived, you might not even recognize that that's something that you need to do. And one of the things that I continually, because I also teach at the City University in New York, and one of the things that I was and so I was telling my students, I was like, you know, you guys, I know that, and you know, all of this, the pandemic, so everybody was going through the pandemic, and that was already stressful. But then, so we were doing online learning, so that was crazy. And then on top of that, we had you know, this massive racial upheaval, not just with George Floyd, but with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And so all these things compounded. I reached out particularly to my Black students, and I'm like, you know, it's okay not to be okay. You know, it's okay to feel some kind of way about what's going on. And some of my students were like, you know, I was one of the only professors who asked them about whether or not they were doing okay, because, and it's not a put down of my colleagues or at all, but just the fact that it would not necessarily occur to them that this, even though it's out there, they might not be related to any of these people, they might not know them personally, but there's an impact that it still has psychologically, and it's okay to be all right saying, I'm not okay with what's going on. I feel some kind of a way, like, and that impacts your work performance, that impacts your school performance. And so, you know, your boss and your colleagues and your dissertation professor and your other, you know, the other people who you're responsible to, if they are not attuned to that, they might be like, well, why aren't you doing, and you don't know that? Why are you upset about it? It's not like they're your friend. And so they expect you to perform the same way that you did.
Yes.
They expect you to just power through whatever it is in the same kinds of ways. They expect that you will just go on as if nothing's happening.
Yeah.
But, and so for Black people to have this burden that is socially collective that they have to deal with, and then they don't necessarily have other people who have the empathy to know that this is something that they're dealing with, it can be so overwhelming. And that's when you see just the manifestation of all these other, the way that trauma manifests itself in our communities.
Yeah. Gold. This is gold stuff. And, you know, this whole month is about, you know, looking ahead as well, and identifying those things in our past that we can build on as a community and forging a way forward and build. And I think that why this area is so poignant, I think, is because when we think, ultimately, a lot of the time, when we as a community think about the future and kind of emancipating ourselves from the mental slavery and things like that, a lot of the time it centers around economics, right? And I don't mind that, because I think that's still a step further than maybe we've been in the past. So we're thinking about, okay, you know, Black Pound Day. I don't know if you did that in America as well. We did it over here. So Black Pound Day was something that was started where we said, okay, on this day, it's now, if I think it happens monthly, but it happened around June this year, I think, at first. And it was an idea where encouraging all the Black community to only spend their money with Black suppliers for that day.
So it's every month you guys do it?
So it was, so the organization online, they are actually trying to do it every month, but I don't think it's taken the steam every month like it did for the one day. So on the one day, it was kind of celebrated more. And I think annually it's more likely to take more steam for the one day. But the dream is, what I've seen, is to have a Black Pound Day every month.
Oh, wow.
And it really, it was powerful to see. And I think it started to make us more aware and start to be more conscious of how we're spending our money. And we've heard kind of a lot of the stories of how other communities keep the pound within their communities 50,000 times
have
more
those
than
same,
we do. Yeah. So we've seen those WhatsApp messages, and we've heard the story. It's taking steam monthly. Okay, cool. It's picking up steam every month now. But so we know that, we kind of understand that, and we're working towards that. But actually, what you're talking about is, I think, it's almost, I would say, even more important than that, really. It's a sense of us really taking our mental health and our relationships really seriously, right? And that can be the bedrock that can really be the foundation for almost these other things. I think it's so vitally important. And what do you think are some of the ways we can start to naturally bring this more into the consciousness of people? Like, think about what you're thinking. Do you know what I mean? Think about how you feel. How can we just make it more the norm?
Just more commonplace. I think like having conversations like this is important. I think that pastors can do a lot in preaching and teaching about how mental health is because listen, we do, especially, like I said, Adventists are very much a part of the health message. And, you know, we don't mind telling people that they need to eat more vegetables and to put away the pork and to not eat, you know, what to eat and what not to eat. We will do that. And so in the same way that we, you know, promote stripples and fried chick and Big Franks and all these other kinds of things, we need to promote people going to check out their mental health and making sure that this is important. I think we normalize it by talking to our children and having these conversations with them, like, and making it something that's normal and natural for them and not a weird thing. Not only, like, because if the only time that you ever hear about psychologists or psychiatrists are in the context of somebody going crazy, oh, they had to, you know, that whole idea of they're being institutionalized, they're going to the loony bin or whatever the case may be. Those are the only things that you think of. That's the only images you have. I mean, can you just imagine if the only time that you ever conceptualized a physician was only, you know, when somebody has to have a triple bypass surgery and, you know, they got, you know, they're on the floor unconscious. That's the only time you ever hear about physicians. You'd be like, I don't want to know no physician. You know,
please no.
Oh, they just trying to chop you up. You know, that's it. I don't want to go there. And so helping people to see that, hey, psychologists are here to help you. These are, you know, taking your kids. I know that sounds strange to some people, but taking your kids to a psychologist to see as a checkup to promote mental wellness and saying, hey, you know, sometimes we just go and we see it, especially if it's
Wow.
included in your insurance plan. Sometimes we just go and see, you know, to make sure that we're doing all right. And as a matter of fact, particularly as a plug for neuropsychology, I think that everybody should have a neuropsychological battery done for them. And here's why.
Wow.
Because when someone has a brain injury, so you're in a car accident or some other kind of accident or something like that, one of the ways that we try to figure out whether or not you have declined or whether or not you have a prognosis of getting better is if we're able to compare how you used to be to what your functioning is now. And a lot of times the only thing that we can rely on is like other people around you kind of saying, oh yeah, he used to. So like if something, God forbid, happened to you, we would go to Mona and be like, hey, so what was his abilities like in these areas? And she would kind of have to rough ballpark an estimate of different things for us in order to kind of figure out whether or not, you know, you're okay. But if we already had a baseline, like if we are, it is so much better. And even now, lots of schools are doing this. Lots of universities here in America will do this if somebody is an athlete. So their freshman year, before they ever step onto the field or the court or whatever they're playing, they have to first come to us. And I used to do this with the University of Georgia. The athletes would come, we would give them a neuropsychological battery so that if ever there was anything that happened to them, we already have a baseline that we can look at and we can say what they are compared to. And this is the reason why you go to checkups, right? For your physician. They take blood work, even if you don't have any kind of blood issues or anything like that. They take it, they take your hormone levels, they check all these things to make sure that there's normal functioning, and so that they can get a baseline for, so that if something ever to happen, they can compare, like, hey, wait a second, your T count was this, and now it's this. That's a change that we need to be concerned about. But if we know that, oh, it's always been like this, that's not something that we're concerned about. And so it's the same exact way. And so normalizing psychology, visiting psychologists, helping yourself have good practices of mental hygiene, as I talked about before, making sure that people understand that it's okay to feel like they need to see somebody if they are in a place where they might have more serious issues, and that's not a weakness. And talking about, and a lot of times we talk about mental illness, and I've been trying to avoid that even in our conversation and focus more on mental health, because when we talk about mental illness, that's all we really equate with therapy. And we need to talk more about mental health.
Wellness.
Yeah, and mental wellness. Exactly.
I love that. No, that is huge. I think literally that is going to be, I'm going to talk to Mona, because I think that's something I want to do. I want to, because the same thing we've done with the dentist, like even though the children don't need to go to the dentist, they've gone to their first appointment already. The doctors the dentist counted their teeth. 1, 2, 3, okay, perfect. Just that, you're right, just to get them into that routine. And that's really good. I think Mona's better at those things than me. Maybe against that female-male thing of like, I'm more inclined to, you know, I've just had to have a fill-in, for example. I'm more inclined when the pain is there to go. But actually what you're saying again is that prevention is better than cure, which seems so obvious when you say it, but I would never have thought of doing that psychologically. Never. It has never crossed my mind to go to a psychologist or a neurophysicist or neuropsychologist, neuropsychologist, and be like, yeah, just give me just check me over, but that is no, I'm gonna do it. I'm actually going to do it. It's probably gonna cost me some money, I'm sure.
But you guys haven't.
But this is the thing. Our NHS is pretty good, but I don't know, because again, I've never asked the question, so it'll be interesting. I've never asked the question of, hey, can I go and get this done? But no, that's massive. That is so good, so good. And I really want us as a community, and everyone who's watching, I really want us to take that kind of seriously. Just start thinking of it that way. Because yeah, we know it doesn't have to be, we don't have to wait for something to go wrong. Like, why? What's the need? Like, if we now have the awareness that we can just start making this part of our habits, it's really just, it's kind of leveling up life, if you know what I mean. It's like really to start thinking about I just feel like it's another level. I feel like you've got me thinking now on another level, because I think always on the level of physical health, like, okay, look, you need to get in shape. Okay, look, you need to be more healthy, and you start thinking about these things, as you say, and then I'm making certain moves towards it. But this now is a whole nother level of awareness where it's like, no, take this has impact on everything else.
Absolutely.
Maybe even some health issues or some lack of motivation to exercise that might be, again, linked to where you are psychologically.
Absolutely.
So
and a lot of, I don't know how this is there, but I know here in the US there is a drive to do co-location, so where your psychologist is in the same place as your doctor. It isn't widespread yet, but I did my internship at a medical center, and so there were I did a rotation at a clinic where they were doing diabetes and other cardiovascular issues. And so when people would come for their checkup about their cardiovascular issues, I would be there and also be doing wellness checks psychologically for them.
At the same time.
And then also for the respiratory system, respiratory center, we would do that as well. And then I did a rotation at the bariatric center. And so and this is actually standard. Bariatrics is one of the places where it's standard for there to be a psychologist as a part of the office, because if you are trying to get bariatric surgery, so weight loss surgery.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, because I know you were like, huh? Yeah. So if you're going to get weight loss surgery, you have to first see the in-house psychologist to talk about what are the things that are going on. Because if you're same thing, a lot of people, when they have something that's wrong, they want a quick fix. So people who might be morbidly obese, because you can't get bariatric surgery just because you want to lose like 5 pounds or something like that. So you have to actually be medically diagnosed as being obese. Okay. So besides some kind of hormonal issue, most people are not becoming that obese just because, that just didn't happen. There is something that is driving that. And so people might say, okay, I'm going to get to the place where I want to get bariatric surgery and expect, okay, I'm just going to get the surgery and everything's going to be fine. But there are usually patterns of behavior that contribute to that weight gain. And if those patterns are not changed, you will, because the surgery doesn't prevent you from gaining weight again. And we have seen people who would come back a second time because they had gone to another place 10 years ago, and they had gotten the surgery. And what the surgery does, there's different types of surgery, but one of the most popular one is where they cut your stomach down to like a sleeve. And so it's called the gastric sleeve, or they'll do like a gastric bypass to your stomach, it'll go into your intestine. And so like those things are supposed to help you it's supposed to help you lose weight. But that sleeve, even though you cut off all of that part of the stomach so that it's just like this little sleeve and you can't eat a whole lot, I know if you gradually eat more and more, you can kind of expand your stomach back to where it was before. Wow. And we tell people that, and we're like, you have to make sure that when you have this surgery, you are changing your patterns of eating. You're changing the way that you are dieting. Like, it's not just a diet, but this is your life. You need to change. And, if people are eating because of depression or because of anxiety or because of relationship issues or because of low self-esteem or because of all these other things, then what's going to happen is you get this surgery and you're going to go back to doing the exact same thing because you haven't dealt with why you are eating in the first place. And so we see people 5 to, and they'll be like, oh, the surgery didn't work. No, the surgery worked. that wasn't because of the surgery. had nothing to do with surgery. That was because whatever happened didn't deal with it. And so what we would do is when people came to the clinic, before they got the surgery, they would have to get a psychological evaluation.
Gotcha.
And we would have to evaluate whether the person was in a place psychologically where they understood that there is a connection between their behaviors and their emotions, and whether they are actively making changes to maintain healthy patterns of behaviors.
Yeah.
And there were times when because we would do these diagnoses and then we would sit around at the table, it would be the psychologist, it would be the surgeons, it would be the nutritionist, and we would all sit together and we would go case by case, like, what about this person? And sometimes I'd be like, no, they're not ready. They can't do it. And sometimes we would refer them for counseling and be like, go to counseling for 6 months and then come back. And then we'll talk again to see whether or not you, because if you are an unhealthy person, like, it's not necessarily because, those unhealthy eating habits are just because I've just always done it. Some of those are linked to emotions. Many times it's linked to some kind of emotional issue. And that unhealthy pattern of eating is because of an unhealthy pattern or maladaptive pattern of coping with emotional issues. And so you have to deal with that first before you come to us. And so, I just use that as an example of where we have psychologists working together with the physician so that, we're all one team. And because if a physician tells you need, in the bariatric case, people might do it because they're really invested in getting the surgery. So they might go to a psychologist. But lots of times if a physician says, hey, I'm going to refer you to a psychologist, they will never go. they won't go. But if you say the psychologist is right down the hall, I'm going to walk you over there and you're going to go and sit in there for an hour. Then, that's what you're going to do. And so the whole idea of making these things more connected so that people see them as linked and see them as one, so that your mind and your body are not these two separate, completely different entities, but they work together and they are each affecting each other. And that idea that I have to take care of my mind just like I take care of my body has to be something that's reinforced over and over and over again in all aspects of society.
Yeah, no, this is very powerful. And it's even given me ideas when I think about, even as a church leadership team, of ways in which we can restructure a leadership team where you have, you've got a pastor, but maybe you do have a nutritionist, maybe you do, not just departments, but literally people who are on the leadership team, a nutritionist, a psychologist, a counselor, all of these things working together. I think that's, as I'm kind of looking at the future, I really think that's a really intelligent way to start thinking about building a kind of holistic team, because unless they're you, the pastor doesn't have all the knowledge of these different things, right? So as he draws this team together, it can be really helpful for the community.
And I was going to say that's one of the things that I do is try to help other ministries and other church leaders to develop exactly what you said, co-location of psychologists inside of church congregations, because they don't know how to do it. It sounds like a great idea, but it's like, okay, how do you do it? And so then I help people to figure out how to structure that in a way that's really helpful and sustainable as well. And it's interesting because what I find is that there are more people who are outside of Adventism that are they are very receptive when I talk about that, rather than Adventists, which I find very strange, because especially with our emphasis on health, it is very odd to me that other churches who might not have that, or other denominations that might not have that same emphasis on health, are much more attuned to that and much more receptive to being helped in that way to create and craft something like that in their church environment than a lot of Adventist churches are, which is disappointing, but it is what it is. It's one of those things where sometimes we don't value things unless other people outside value them.
Yeah.
So, there's that.
I think that is, again, looking forward, like at the future for our, I think that would be so helpful to our community. And I know I'm going to be back in touch with you to find out how I can, you know, tips and ideas on how to structure that, because, you know, with especially churches that are majority Black churches, if we can kind of get that right, or not even get it right, but just be working towards that in our space, that the repercussions of that are just huge.
No, absolutely.
All right, so we've got a question. Going back quickly, are Black people still justified in not trusting medics?
Okay, I would. So that is I would not. I don't want to tell people not to trust physicians or not to trust people in the medical field. There is a kind of nuanced question, because I feel that we need to be trusting. Those same ideas of, oh, you would have some kind of test injected on you without your knowledge and stuff like that. Like, that won't happen. That can't happen. This is the reason why we have malpractice insurance and things like that. Like, you would totally lose your license. You would not be practicing anywhere, you know? So there are lots of safeguards now that you cannot do the types of things that obviously were done in the past. Legally, medically, ethically, professionally, like, those things don't happen. And so it's really important that we understand that nobody's going to be injecting anything to you. And psychologists also, just so that you understand, we aren't people who like pump you up with different things, like, so, because sometimes people think that that's what we do. That we don't do that. But just going in the medical profession as a whole, like, that is unethical. You can't do that without somebody's consent to give them something that they didn't agree to, or do testing on them that they did not consent to. So that is something that you don't have to worry about. Some people, even when they're talking about the vaccine for coronavirus, people are like, oh no, I don't trust it. Da, 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 da. You know, nobody's going to be giving you a vaccine that hasn't been thoroughly tested, you know, and that is part of, unfortunately, the mistakes of the past and the different things of the past that have taught us that you can't do that. And we got to heavily regulate it so that people can't do that anymore. So that part, you are fine trusting your doctors in that regard. But the second part I will say is that there is implicit bias in the medical field. And in if your psychologist hasn't done the work to be culturally competent, then they might miss things like we were talking about earlier. If your physician is not culturally competent, if they are not doing their own work and introspection into seeing how they might be biased in a way that they don't recognize, they might not be giving you the care that you need, because they might not recognize how their bias is playing into the patient care that they're giving you. And so I don't say that to say that they can't be trusted, but I think that it's important that, again, if you feel like you're not getting the care that you need, to have that conversation. So I have that conversation with my physicians too, with my dentists too. Like, you know, I had an issue with one of my dentists, and because I needed to get some fillings, and they said something like, I wrote a whole letter to them about it, about the whole thing. But what it kind of summarized, boiled down to, was that they were kind of making a presumption about what I could afford. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, we didn't offer that to you because we didn't know what kind of, you know, what kind of insurance, you know, what you could afford, you know. And I was just kind of like, excuse me, you know, and that kind of a thing. You know, and I'd let them have it. I was like, you know, and I don't go there anymore. But I still go to the dentist, right?
Yeah, of course.
So just like how we were talking before, if you see somebody that you don't necessarily jive with or something like that, you don't say that I'm not going to go to anyone else. I go to someone else who can take care of me better than this other person. So it's the same thing. If you have a doctor or any other kind of medical professional who is not helping you in the way that you need to, and is not respecting you in the way that you need to, you should trust yourself in saying, hey, this seems like a microaggression, And
Yeah.
I'm not crazy for thinking that and
Yeah.
being like, I'm going to somebody else, or having that
Mm,
conversation with the person themselves and letting them know that no, that's not okay, and bringing it to their attention in their own bias, because there
mm,
is bias a lot of time.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes people are intimidated by the authority of the white coat, and so they don't want to say anything. They might say,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to come off as being XYZ.
Yeah.
Like, just a month ago, my father had a stroke, actually, and he
Mm,
was admitted to the hospital. And my brother and I went down there, and because with COVID, you can only have one person at a time. And so up to the floor, and then after he came back down, I went back up, and I wanted to ask them some very specific questions. And I was like, "Where's the doctor?" And they were like, oh, they're still making their rounds. So it's like, okay, so I'll wait for a little while. And they're like, well, they'll be about a half an hour. And I understand that, because like when I worked at the hospital, we had to do
yeah.
psychological rounds. It took a long
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, okay. But when you had a patient's family who was there, you would make
You
sure that you went
prioritize.
back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was there waiting, and they kept saying, oh, another 10 minutes, oh, another 10 minutes, oh, another 10 minutes. And I was like, you know what? See, now I'm gonna have to, and it was a struggle
They
for
don't
me,
know
because
you.
I was
They
like,
don't know you. They're not ready, doctor. They're not ready.
I was like, I don't want to be perceived as the angry Black woman. I don't want to play into that stereotype. But
But
here it is going, and now it's 2.5 hours,
wow.
and I'm like, so then I just went to the nurse. I was like, where's the physician? And they were like, oh, well, they're, I was like, where are they? They're doing charting. I was like, take me to where they are. I'll go. And the nurse is like, I'll go and I'll tell them. And I was like, no, I will go. I will go. And so the nurse, he started walking, and I just followed him. I followed him to where they were. And then I was like, listen, I have been sitting here for when I came in here, it was this time. Now it's this time. It's been 2.5 hours. I've been told, first it was a half an hour. Then after that, it's 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Somebody needs to come right now, And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, we'll come right now, in 5 minutes. I was like, no, not 5 minutes. Somebody's gonna come right now. And so, then they got up and they wanted, and then it's interesting, because when you have a stroke, you're on the neurology ward.
Yeah.
And, when I started asking the questions, they were like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a neuropsychologist. They're like, oh, and so then now their attitude changes altogether. And I'm like, and so now it's just like, oh, you're not just like, the whatever they thought in their head, and even, and the doctor, she was white. And she said something when I said that I was a neuropsychologist. She said, oh, that's so, and you could hear the surprise in her voice. Like, and she's caught herself. I think she was going to say, oh, that's so great. Like, kind of a little bit patronizing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so nice. Or something like that. And she's like, oh, that's so, and she paused. And then she's like, appropriate to the situation we're
Beautiful.
I was like, yeah. We'll go with
it is. Yeah, it is.
Wow. But so definitely there is bias in a lot of these professions, and if people don't recognize their own bias, they can perpetuate stereotypes that do wind up having poorer patient outcomes than there should be. But call them out on it. Call them out on their junk. And you don't have to like me to give me the ethical care that I'm entitled to as a patient of the hospital or the clinic or whatever. So
wow. Oh, Dr. Courtney Ray, I could talk to you for hours. In fact, I have spoken to you for hours today. It has been Amazing. Thank you so much for making
Aw.
time to be here.
Yeah.
It's been just so insightful, and some real takeaways that I'm going to take on personally, and I hope, you know, the community can take on, because I just think it's huge. And, you know, please continue to do what you're doing, and you know that just as being who you are is it's such a strong display, you're a role model, to be honest with you.
Oh, well, thank
And
you.
I'm sure you're aware of that already, but it's the truth. So just keep doing your thing. Keep being active on Facebook the way you are, and online. Keep just speaking the truth, man. It's really important, and I'm just so grateful that you're my friend, and that we just get to do this. So yeah, just thank you so much. If there's any last little thought you want to share, you know, take it away.
Well, I just want to encourage everyone, you know, just like we've been saying before, to make sure that you take care of your mental wellness. Take it seriously. You don't have to be mentally ill, you know, to see a psychologist. Mental wellness and good mental hygiene is important. And one last thing I just want to say, for anyone who wants to learn more about the Society for Black Neuropsychology, go to societyforblackneuropsychology.org. Or you can send an email to be added to our mailing list, So Black Neuro. So SOBLACKNEURO. So blackneuro@gmail.com. And we will sign you up for our mailing list. We do things for, we just had a big seminar for undergrad students, like telling them about what neuropsychology is, how to get into grad school, all that kind of stuff. And it was free for everybody. There's, you know, a recording of it if anybody wants to go to our YouTube channel and watch it, because we want to really increase the representation in our field, because the more people who are culturally competent, the better our community will be in being able to address some of the mental wellness issues that are prevalent in our community. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate it. And I'll speak to you soon. Remember to save that video, because you're on the Templeway account. Make sure you save it.
Yes.
Because yeah, I know this one's going to be watched over and over again. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. And you're welcome, Norma. And also, I see Mona put up the Society for Black Neuropsychology.org. Exactly. That is exactly our website. Thank you so much, you guys.
Lovely. Blessings. Peace.